Interview Roger T. Ames, Bringing Chinese Philosophy onto the Stage of the Modern World. In 2011, Confucian Role Ethics, a vocabulary was published by the University of Hawai Press and the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. In this work, Confucian Role Ethics was for the first time systematically and comprehensively articulated, presenting Confucian ethics as a distinctive ethical system centered on relational being and role-bearing persons. This framework distinguishes itself from dominant Western traditions such as deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics in its conventional form. The concept has received widespread acclaim in the international academic community. It has been praised for its holistic, narrative, and practical character, revitalizing Confucianism as a living moral tradition transmitted across generations and endowed with universal philosophical significance. While some scholars, such as Stephen Angle, have raised critical questions, they nonetheless acknowledge its core insights, particularly its relational conception of the person, as both compelling and illuminating. Today, Confucian role ethics has become a recognized term within contemporary ethical discourse. The author of this work is Roger T. Ames, widely regarded as one of the most distinguished interpreters of Chinese philosophy in the Western world. Roger T. Ames was born in 1947 in Toronto, Canada, and grew up in the United Kingdom and Vancouver. As a young man, he developed a strong interest in poetry and literature. Around 1966, he left Canada to study liberal arts at the University of Redlands in California, later transferring to the University of British Columbia, UBC, where he majored in philosophy and Chinese language and obtained his bachelor's degree. During this period, he spent a year as an exchange student at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, marking his first deep engagement with Chinese culture. There, he was profoundly influenced by scholars such as Lao Ziquang and Tang Junyi. After completing his undergraduate studies, Ames pursued a master's degree at National Taiwan University, 1970 to 1972, under the tutorial supervision of Yang Yue, earning an MA in philosophy. In 1975, he moved to the United Kingdom to study at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, University of London, under the renowned sinologist D.C. Lau, and completed his PhD in 1978. His doctoral dissertation, titled the Chu Shu chapter of the Huainan Tzu, The Sources and Orientation of Its Political Thought, laid a solid foundation for his mastery of classical Chinese and his cross-cultural comparative perspective. After receiving his PhD in 1978, Ames joined the Department of Philosophy at the University of Hawaii at Manoa as an assistant professor. He remained there for 38 years, 1978 to 2016, later serving as associate professor, full professor, and director of the Center for Chinese Studies. He is an important heir to the University of Hawaii's tradition of comparative philosophy, a tradition that can be traced back to scholars such as Charles Moore. After retiring as professor emeritus in 2016, Ames relocated to China. He currently serves as humanities chair professor at Peking University and academic director to Berggruen Institute China. Over the years, Ames has consistently reinterpreted classical Chinese thought through the lenses of process philosophy and relationality. He has articulated Confucian ethics as a distinctive ethical system grounded in concrete social roles and dynamic relational practices, offering a compelling East Asian alternative to contemporary global ethical dilemmas. In addition, he has long promoted dialogue between pragmatism and Chinese philosophy, systematically developing a distinctive vocabulary for Chinese thought that emphasizes its processual, contextual, and narrative dimensions. His work has had a profound impact on comparative philosophy, the contemporary revival of Confucianism, and cross-cultural ethical studies. It has been hailed as a milestone achievement that enables Confucianism to be taken on its own terms. Ames's achievements in translation are renowned for their philosophical depth and cross-cultural insight. Rather than being content with literal equivalence, he draws on process philosophy and pragmatism to revitalize classical texts, bringing out the dynamic, relational, and contextual dimensions of Chinese thought. For instance, he renders Ren as consummate conduct rather than benevolence, Dao as way-making instead of way or path, Qing as creative resolve rather than simply integrity or honesty, Xingming as using names properly rather than rectification of names, and Zhongyong as focusing the familiar instead of doctrine of the mean. Recently, Tokuyu Ko, an independent writer and a former student of Professor Ames, conducted an interview with this great philosopher and translator who first encountered China at the age of 18 and has since devoted himself to bringing Chinese philosophy onto the stage of the modern world. In the interview, Professor Ames reflects on his academic career, discusses several key concepts in his interpretation of Chinese philosophy, and considers the place of Chinese philosophy in the world today. My career has been formed in a very Chinese manner. Question: what first sparked your interest in Chinese or Asian culture and philosophy? And what led you on to the path of studying Chinese philosophy in particular? A. It was when I went to Hong Kong at the age of 18 for the exchange program with the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I lived there for 1 year, and was much amazed by the people there. It was particularly intriguing to me how Chinese or Hong Kong people behave differently from Western students. For instance, Chinese people tend to form groups and hang out collectively. I can tell that they cherish the bond between classmates or tongxue or tonghak. On the other hand, Western students prefer to act individually and cherish boundaries. Indeed, in the Western culture, being independent is often regarded as a sign of maturity. Interestingly, what drove my curiosity is actual people rather than books. Looking back on my life, I feel that I have always attempted to make sense of the associations behind the behaviors of Chinese or Asian people. Another factor that has led me through my scholarly career is the special bond between masters and disciples in Chinese culture, so-called shiziguangxi. Particularly, I have an indelible memory of Yang Yuwei, my advisor during my master's years. He was a really kind and helpful teacher, and had an astounding command of classical Chinese. I owe a lot to him for my Chinese linguistic skills. At the University of Hawai at Manoa, UHM, where I spent most of my teaching career, I have advised 50 or so PhD students in total. It was not that we formed our own school, but the bond among students and faculty was strong. Since early on UHM became the world center for comparative philosophy, all students who pursue their PhD there were at a high level. It is a mutual learning through collaborations rather than me teaching them. Many of my later works, including Human Becomings, are the products of my experience during this period. It was also a great memory that a group of my students collected the essays on my work and published them as a book entitled One Corner of the Square, Essays on the Philosophy of Roger T. Ames. The title derives from a phrase in the Analects: I do not open the way for students who are not driven with eagerness. I do not supply a vocabulary for students who are not trying desperately to find the language for their ideas. If on showing students one corner they do not come back to me with the other three, I will not repeat myself. 7.8. I have spent my scholarly career in a way much characterized by Chinese-style apprenticeship both as a student and as a teacher. It is my greatest delight that I myself could be part of this intergenerational succession of Chinese philosophical scholarship. Question: you have translated many Chinese classics, including the Analects, Zhongyong, Focusing the Familiar, and Deontology. How do you choose the topics and texts you work on? Conversely, why have you not chosen to translate certain other classics, such as the Xuanzi and Neo-Confucian works? A. My academic career has been formed much through collaborations. After completing my PhD program in London, my supervisor D.C. Lau, and I left there in the same year. I left for Hawaii and he went to Hong Kong. But we still met each other regularly in Hong Kong, and read Chinese classics together. In our reading sessions, we usually began from my own translations of many Chinese classics, and they became the foundations of many of my later works. We collaborated on some translated works together, such as Sun Pin, The Art of Warfare and the first chapter of the Huainanzi, Yuandao. David L. Hall, one of my collaborators, was central in the formation of my early career as well. He did not understand the Chinese language at all, but his solid understanding of Western philosophy enabled him hermeneutically to have a panoramic picture of philosophy and where to place Chinese philosophy within it. I had thought one cannot understand Chinese thought without a command of Chinese language, but after collaborating with Hall, I completely changed my view. The synoptic vision he had in his mind helped me philosophize both my understanding and my translations of Chinese classical thought. Many people say David L. Hall is a philosopher, and Roger T. Ames is a sinologist. The sad truth is, however, that people in the philosophy field don't have much time for sinologists. My collaboration with Hall helped me become a philosopher. In short, my academic career, including the selection of my translated works, is formed organically and associatively, or, let's say, in a very Chinese manner. Regarding Neo-Confucianism, I always use the concept of root and branch, benmo, to explain my views. Songming Neo-Confucianism, as a matter of course, has its roots in Confucianism before that, particularly in the pre-Qin era. Without thoroughly understanding Chinese philosophy as it evolved during the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods or even earlier, one cannot comprehend Neo-Confucianism. For me, understanding pre-Qin Chinese thought itself was an enormous task. Even now, I still regard myself as a hard-working novice in the process. Question: at what point did your studies shift from close studies of individual classics to exploring the broader picture of or patterns in Chinese philosophy? A. In fact, I did not change my trajectory. The broader picture was always in my mind. As I mentioned earlier, my curiosity about the underlying way of thinking behind the behavior of Chinese people is what drove me into academic explorations of Chinese thought in the first place. One can find such traces in my early works, including The Art of Rulership, where in the introduction I touched on the question regarding the common ground behind the traditions of different Chinese intellectual schools such as Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. In this sense, the broader picture comes first. Every time I finished the translation of one specific classical work, I always went back to the question of the holistic and organic worldview of Chinese philosophy, and wondered in what way this classic reflects it. Question: how do you reflect on your days in Beijing since you came here as the Humanities Chair Professor of Peking University in 2016? A. In Beijing, I have had a most productive time. I completed many works, including Human Becomings, Living Chinese Philosophy, a sourcebook in classical Confucian philosophy and a conceptual lexicon of classical Confucian philosophy. My collaborations with the Berggruen Institute were central to my time in China. I helped them set up their China Center as a research fellow in 2016 to 2018, and have been actively involved in the Berggruen China Center's activities, including its research projects on Tianxia, philosophy of family, and co-becoming, Gongsheng. Collaborations and interactions were also an integral part of my years in Beijing. I could visit universities across China, and had great exchanges with many great scholarly minds in China, including Wang Bo, Zheng Kai, Zhang Xianglong, Qing Lesong, Peking University, Chen Lai, at Tsinghua University, Sun Xiangchen, at Fudan University, Chen Yejun, at Zhejiang University, Wu Zhenyu. At Wuhan University, Wang Qingjie, at University of Macau, Zhao Tingyang, and many more. Chinese philosophy understands the world in a dynamic, relational way. Question: you have always emphasized the importance of taking Chinese philosophy on its own terms. Indeed, your translations of many Chinese classical notions appear to be quite unique, such as Ren as consummate conduct, Dao as waymaking, and Zhongyong as focusing the familiar. What do you mean by understanding Chinese philosophy on its own terms? A. By on its own terms, I do not mean taking Chinese philosophy in an objective way. Rather, I challenge the clear boundary between subjectivity and objectivity. As many pragmatists and empiricists such as William James have observed, the concept of objective knowing itself is dubious. In Chinese and Japanese, the subjective and objective are respectively expressed as the host's and the guest's points of view, Zhuguan and Keguan. These two notions are complementary rather than dualistic and dichotomous. I often use mirroring to describe the way of understanding we might apply to different traditions of thoughts. The idea is inspired by a passage in Huinanzi: sages are like mirrors, they neither go out to meet things nor see them off, and they respond to things without storing anything up. Hence in a myriad of transformations they are innocent of harm. Mirroring does not mean reflecting reality completely. It is impossible since there is no purely objective standpoint, no view from nowhere. We always see from a particular perspective. The salient idea, therefore, is being aware of our own biases and doing our utmost in interpreting the texts without overriding them with any predetermined assumptions. Knowing our own biases is crucial. For instance, David L. Hall could not read Chinese, but he developed a profound understanding of Chinese philosophy because he was deeply immersed in the history of Western philosophy that constituted his own biases. This awareness enabled him to situate Chinese thought within a broader philosophical picture and turn obstructions into insights. I myself am a Westerner, and although I am not a Christian, I am still biased by Christianity. In this sense, my academic career studying Chinese philosophy has also been a gradual process of understanding Western philosophy and the Platonic cum-Christian tradition that has shaped my own intellectual background. We can see the most obvious examples in early missionary translations, such as those by James Legge. Their translations were heavily biased by Christian ideas. For instance, he translated Ren as benevolence and Tao as the way. We are always, often unconsciously, biased by our own languages and cultures. In many respects, it is not that we speak language as much as language speaks us. Hence, interpretation must begin with self-understanding and remain attentive to it. For me, studying Chinese philosophy has simultaneously deepened my understanding of Western philosophy. In short, what I mean by, on its own terms, is to place ourselves in this ceaseless process of engaging in conversations with, or mirroring, the texts we elucidate, while at the same time addressing our own biases. Question: you use zootology to describe the underlying mainstream worldview in Chinese thought, in contrast to that based on the ontology that has characterized mainstream Western thinking. What is a zootological way of seeing the world? Let me begin with ontology. Ontological thinking posits that every entity possesses an essence that defines it and distinguishes it from other things. Taking the term human being as an example, there is some self-same, identical characteristic that makes all members of humankind the same. This essence is so strong that you cannot stop being human. Even if one degrades oneself or behaves like an animal, one still remains a human being. We can find the traces of Western ontological thinking in many Western ideas, including the pathetic fallacy, that is, the human being, the chain of being, God, angels, and the idea that the world is created for human salvation. If we apply this perspective to the world more broadly, everything is essentially what it is: a tree is a tree, and a dog is a dog. In this world, everything is taxonomically classified into certain categories. In this taxonomical, categorical perception of the world, definition and knowing are very closely tied together. If you want to know something, you have to define it. Defining means setting its boundaries. Within ontological thinking, the essence, or categorical definition of the human being is permanent and unchanging, and thus not affected by the world and experience. We can explain such thinking by the environing factors. In the ancient Greek world, surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea and vast deserts, navigation required fixed reference points. To orient oneself in such an environment, one needed an Archimedean point, something stable and unchanging. In this intellectual environment, philosophy developed in a way that emphasized permanence. As a result, mathematics became the model of knowledge. Statements like 1 + 1 = 2 are beautiful. Indeed, many major figures in the history of Western philosophy, from Pythagoras to Descartes, Leibniz, and Russell, were also mathematicians. In the Chinese tradition, however, the world is not primarily perceived as fixed and unchanging. The Chinese world is completely different. It is a monsoon, agrarian world. Managing growth and life is what we call farming. Thus, instead of regarding something as determinate and unchanging as the basic principle, and seeing humans as human beings, the underlying idea in Chinese culture has been life, and humans are human becomings. Whereas the basic idea in Greek tradition is ontology, that in Chinese tradition is zoetology. Zoe means life in ancient Greek. It is evident from the idea of ceaseless procreation, shengshengbuxi, ceaseless procreating is what is meant by change. And the greatest capacity of the cosmos is life itself. All of these tell us that life is the underlying and greatest principle of the world in Chinese philosophy. In this sense, the Book of Changes, I Ching, can also be the Book of Life, Xingjing, comparable to the Bible, Xingjing, in the Chinese world. In summary, the ontological way of thinking in ancient Greek and Western philosophy sees the world in a categorical, taxonomical way. Everything possesses unchanging, essential characteristics that set clear boundaries with others, and make real definition possible. On the other hand, the zoetological way of thinking in Chinese philosophy perceives the world in a dynamical, relational way. Everything is constantly changing and interconnected with everything else. This kind of worldview places the experience of life at its center. Unfinished, the full text on Substack.